Hello everyone, welcome to the Ultimate Russia Guide Part 2. We are tackling B-type antennas today, and so basically we're gonna identify the clusters for the B-type antenna, how to identify a B-type antenna, obviously, and also camera smudges. So with B-type antenna especially, and maybe only even, uh, camera smudges are actually quite important for region guessing. They aren't always like you could, get a well enough vibe of the landscape to be able to guess them without them, but they are really, really good to know, and sometimes you might even need them. Um, so basically, we have about 6 clusters today, I think. So there's the one on the Ukraine border, there's one in this kind of desert here, and then we have the Nizhny cluster, because Nizhny's like in the middle, the Yekaterinburg cluster, the Orenburg cluster, which is just this tiny one down here, and then lastly, the Novosibirsk cluster. So yeah, we're just going to go through all of them today, including the camera smudges. But first of all, let's find out how to identify a B-type antenna. So we have this beautiful lock here, and as you can see, the little protrusion on the antenna is on the left side. If you guys remember from the A-type video, it was on the right side. Now just remember B-type is actually on the left side, not the other way around. Can be easy to get confused, but yeah, if you see it on the left side there, that's going to be the B-type antenna. Now, one thing to make clear, there is such thing as a very B-type antenna, which we'll get to in the next video. But very B, this little clump here is bigger in very B than it is in this case. And also, if you look up, you'll be able to see smudges in B-type. For example, we have this camera smudge here. In very B-type, I think there is technically a smudge, but it's so hard to see that it's almost impossible. So I would say, basically, if you don't see any smudges in the sky, consider very B. If you do see smudges, it should be B-type. All right, so now we're going to go through some of the clusters here. So the first one we're going to do is the Ukraine border cluster. And as you can see here, we actually have it. So this is all in September coverage. I think there's some in August actually, but it is usually fall coverage from what I've seen. I'd say we have a lot of like bushes, just kind of like lower kind of bush vegetation. It's also very hilly. So if you see something that's hilly with, fall coverage, has like a lot of bushes, it's pretty dry. Oh, this is not dry actually, but that's pretty interesting. But it is a rainy road, I guess. Pretty interesting. Yeah, typically that's going to be the Ukraine border kind of area here. As you can see, dry, hilly, September coverage. It's all fairly consistent among these locks, generally speaking, but Russia is not always consistent. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's the general kind of idea of what this cluster looks like here. Next, we're going to move on to this area here. So this is a desert, and there is a camera smudge meta for both of these, but I have not mentioned them yet. So this area is kind of deserty. It's dry, it's flat, it has like no trees. So as you can see here, no trees anywhere in sight. Very dry, just, yeah, very flat as well. That stays consistent here, although we have a little bit of bushes over here, which is kind of, I guess, a little bit of an outlier. But with the road angle, you can get this, just like that. We have this road here, looks about the same. This road looks about the same as well. Yeah, all these are really just deserts with not really any trees, a lot of flatness, a lot of dryness. And yeah. Next we have the Orenburg cluster here, a very small cluster. We're not even going to consider this area over here though. But the Orenburg cluster, I would say it's basically also fall coverage. So make sure not to confuse it with the Ukraine border cluster. It also has a lot of dead bushes on the side of the road. We don't see any dead bushes here, but I guess we do see some bushes. We also have a little bit of hilliness usually, although this lock does not seem hilly, but there usually is a bit of hilliness in Orenburg. Wonder if I could find any. It's not always going to be hilly in every single lock, but should, generally speaking, be pretty hilly. I'm actually struggling to find some hilliness, so as you guys can see, even the descriptors that I'm telling you guys are not going to always be there. You have to have multiple different clues to try to pinpoint a region here. I know this area is very hilly, like extremely hilly. Like if I just look over here, this area should be really, really hilly. That's crazy, actually. That's actually crazy. Okay, this area is actually kind of hilly. I swear Orenburg is usually more hilly than it is right here. Oh, this is very hilly. Okay, yeah, this part's very hilly right here. But yeah, if it's autumn coverage and it's hilly and it has a lot of like kind of dead bushes or just normal bushes perhaps on the side of the road, that's fairly indicative of Orenburg. There is also a smudge meta for it that we'll go through later. The next cluster we have here is the Novosibirsk cluster. So this cluster, I would say one good tip for this cluster and just the east in general. I'm calling this east, by the way, even though maybe it's more center, I guess, but we're going to call it the east anyway. So we're going to take a look at this lock here. I would say lines of trees. I think birch trees, honestly, lines of birch trees is going to be a decent clue for the east. Now, of course, you can find lines of trees anywhere, but I feel like you find a lot more of them in the east. Also, one tip that I don't know how many people have talked about this. I think Finbar has in some of his videos, but the grass in the east is generally very organized and green. Like, look at this grass right here. Very green, very organized, just very orderly. It looks just kind of beautiful, honestly. Now, if we go to the grass in the west, I'm sure almost any lock would work. You're going to see it's a lot more disorderly, just a lot weirder looking, I guess. Yeah, kind of like in that lock. It's probably not the greatest example. Maybe if I click here. Yeah, like look at this grass. Like this grass is absolutely, it's more yellow, probably because it's fall coverage to be fair. But there's a lot of stuff in it. It's not very orderly. It's not very neat. It's not very green. It's just a lot more crazy looking, right? Chaotic. So yeah, that's going to be a good tip for the east as well. And also, as you would see in Omsk, sometimes you get birch clusters in Novosibirsk. You probably see some on this road or something. I don't know if those are birch clusters, but yeah, you'll see birch clusters sometimes. I guess you have the lines of trees here, lines of birch trees. Yeah, sometimes you'll see birch clusters in Novosibirsk. You'll see them in Omsk. You'll also see them in parts like Chelyabinsk and in Yekaterinburg even. So look out for that as well. But yeah, apart from that, Novosibirsk generally tends to be very flat as well. And yeah, just very green, lots of birches, very open, flat landscape, and not much more that I can say for that cluster there. All right, and going into the last two clusters here, we have the Nizhny cluster, just because Nizhny's in the middle there, and then the Yekaterinburg cluster. Now, the reason I left these for last, honestly, is because I cannot differentiate them. These two clusters are what makes B-type the absolute hardest to learn. These are very difficult to differentiate, in my opinion, and I honestly can't give you guys too many tips for it. Most locks look a lot like normal Russia, just a lot of pine trees, a lot of birch trees, maybe a bit of hilliness here or there, but usually not much hilliness in general. Yeah, there's not going to be too many tips for these kind of rounds, and sometimes it's just going to be sort of a gamble. There are smudges that you can sometimes see that will help you, but it's not always, you're not always going to be able to see it. They're not always going to be helpful smudges. So yeah, but I'm going to give you guys two landscape tips to maybe a little bit be able to differentiate them. So if we go into this lock here, you will see Nizhny sand. So around Nizhny Novgorod, you usually get a little bit of sand basically along the sides of the roads, kind of like in Surgut, but Surgut's a little more extreme and it looks a little different. Yeah, as you can see, a lot of sand on the sides of the roads here. Even over here, we have some sand. Let me actually full screen to show you guys more clearly, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of sand near Nizhny. So if you see sand and B-type antenna, not a horrible idea to click Nizhny. And next we're going to go into Chelyabinsk here. So for this one, it's actually just the birch clusters that I was talking about earlier. So as you can see over there, we have a kind of clump, a round circle sort of birch trees. And these are more indicative of the east, pretty common in like Chelyabinsk, Omsk, Novosibirsk, just that kind of area. Also Tyumen, stuff like that. Or maybe not Tyumen, Kurgan, I guess. Yeah, Kurgan. But yeah, this general region will have kind of birch clusters. So if you see that with B-type, you can use it with the smudges, hopefully get a good guess. All right, now to talk about those elusive camera smudges. So we're on the Camera Smudges of Russia doc made by Illusion with significant help from Vehicle Ronald and Y4Suo. Okay. But yeah, thanks to those individuals for creating this doc. It's definitely very helpful. So the first one we have is, generally speaking, only in the Ukraine border cluster and the Novosibirsk cluster. And so obviously, when you look at this, you're like, oh God, what is this? I'll show you exactly how to differentiate this from other smudges. So one thing we have here, you'll notice, so we have the B-type antenna here, right? B-type antenna. And then we have these two smudges in the back. Now, we call this back smudge. Now, back smudge is very common in Ukraine border and Novosibirsk, obviously. We'll get into a different variant later. But look at this. to the side, to the west of the driving direction of the car. So we're driving this way, right? We're driving this way. Now we just look to the west, and this will have one smudge. Now this is important. So the Ukraine border and Novosibirsk clusters will have the back smudge, but it'll also only have one dot here instead of two, because there is a different variant that has two dots. And so with this, when we look at this round, all we have to do is guess between Novosibirsk and the Ukraine border cluster. And just looking at it, it's not fall coverage, so that gives it away already. But we know, just by looking at this, that it's Novosibirsk. Will we 5K? Maybe, maybe not, but we at least get the cluster here. All right, and just to ingrain this all in your heads a little bit, I wanted to just look around on the map maker, see if we could see those smudges in-game. So if we go to the Novosibirsk cluster here, we'll see we have the B-type antenna right here. And then if we look up here, we have back smudge. And then we look over here, we see a single smudge. You can ignore this tiny smudge up here. Don't worry about that. But if we see this single smudge here, you could be like, okay, well, I know it's going to be Novosibirsk or the Ukraine border. You look at it, it's not fall coverage. It has lines of trees, too many birches for Ukraine. It's not hilly either. It has to be Novosibirsk. All right, now we're going into the next variant here. We have 2 dots west instead of 1. And so this is going to be, generally speaking, Yekaterinburg or Chelyabinsk, but also notably Orenburg. And it does say here, if you have May coverage with the smudge, it'll be Moscow, East Kostroma, or Sverdlovsk. So that's basically Moscow, East Kostroma, or Sverdlovsk. We're going to ignore those for this one, but if you do identify it, that's great for you. I'm just hoping and praying that that never happens to me, that I never have to deal with that. But yeah, if we look at this, it actually gives us the full view here. So when we're looking at this lock, we'll see, okay, we have B-type antenna, right? B-type antenna. Now we have back smudge, just like usual, except this time, now we have 2 dots instead of 1. You can see the left one here, the right one here. And so this will basically tell us, okay, we're probably in Yekaterinburg or something. Actually, this is Sverdlovsk, but it's probably close to Yekaterinburg. Actually, it's the Sverdlovsk Oblast, so yeah, it should be, yeah, pretty close to Yekaterinburg. So you'd be very close there if you got that. However, notably, this is also in Orenburg. So if we look in Orenburg here, and I just clicked Orenburg on the map maker. If we look in Orenburg here, we have our B-type antenna. We got back smudge. And then we look over here. Look at that, 2 dots. And since it kind of looks like the south, we can't confuse it with the south, because guess what? Back smudge isn't in that deserty part of the south that we went over. The Ukraine border would have the single dot instead of the 2 dots. We know this has to be Orenburg. All right, now we're going to go over some front smudge. So as you can see here, we actually have this like triangle in the sky. And this triangle in the sky is actually going to be in this deserty region. So if you somehow struggled with this location, you could look at the sky, see the triangle, and then this little purple dot here, well, circled in purple. You could see that, and you'll know for sure that you're in this region. We're not going to go over this too much, probably, because I don't find this region very difficult. As you can see, we do have this triangle in the sky, and we actually call this front smudge in general, not the triangle itself, but just if you have it more in front of the car. So this is going to be like front smudge here. So yeah, front smudge is going to be here, and basically anywhere else except for the Ukraine border and Novosibirsk. It'll never be those two. So yeah. Now you guys might have noticed I actually avoided to talk about Krasnodar, and the reason being is because this has front smudge, it has the triangle, but there's actually a dot near the bottom of the triangle instead. And the thing with this is, it also will look different from that deserty region that we talked about. So if we look at a Krasnodar lock here, for one, let's just look at the landscape. Let's just be normal Geoguessr players for a second and take a look at the landscape. Doesn't look like a desert. It has too many trees. In fact, it doesn't look like anything because it doesn't look like Ukraine border either. So arguably the landscape is pretty unique in itself. But also, we can look in the sky and we can see that triangle and we can see that beautiful little dot there telling us that it's Krasnodar. But wait, you guys might have noticed something. We also have this all over Nizhny Novgorod, Ivanovo, Moscow, even over here further to the east. And I don't think this is the most useful thing ever, but you can use this to differentiate from Yekaterinburg if you can even see it. Now, I've noticed a lot of times I'm not able to see the smudges, honestly. There's either clouds blocking it, the sun blocking it, trees blocking it, whatever it might be. And it just doesn't always appear, honestly. But if you do see the triangle, I call it the Ivanovo triangle because Ivanova is a pretty good hedge most of the time. But yeah, if you see it, consider Nizhny, Ivanovo, that kind of area as a decent hedge. And I will show you guys a lock in a second here, just to show you what it looks like in game. All right, as you can see, we have a lock right near Nizhny here. I just clicked this random road. And as you can see here, we have the beautiful Ivanovo triangle. Now, all you really have to think about is this Krasnodar or is it, well, not Krasnodar? Well, we have tons of birch trees, so it's not going to be south. And yeah, it just doesn't look anything like Krasnodar. So yeah, once you combine those two things, you send Ivanovo or Nizhny or just whatever you think is a good hedge. And yeah, feel free to even just be creative with it even. This is post Sword Slicer, just want to clear some things up here. So for one, I actually mistaked that Ivanovo lock for Krasnodar. For some reason, I thought this example was Krasnodar for some reason, even though I know that it can be in other places. But just ignore that, they can be in both. So just wanted to clear up any confusion there. They could just be in this region here or in Krasnodar. I also totally forgot to talk about one of the smudges. So it's this one here, the most useful smudge from the set. However, they're being sarcastic. So we have one in Nizhny, basically around Nizhny. We have one around Ekaterinburg and Tyumen, and then we have one in Moscow. But this is basically useless, unfortunately. So this is the other variant of front smudge that I kind of referred to earlier. If you see this, it's just kind of unfortunate. So as you can see, we're driving this direction here. And then if we look to the front of us here, so just to the front left, I guess, we have front smudge, essentially. However, this is not a triangle. It's just useless, unfortunately. So, if you see this, it's just not that useful, unfortunately. But just wanted to show you guys that in case you got confused and saw this and thought, like, why isn't the triangle there? Yeah, sometimes you're going to get this and it's just not going to help you. But anyways, guys, that's it for the Ultimate Russia Guide Part 2 B-type antenna. Hope you learned something. I know it's a lot of information. Just practice it. Try to learn the clusters. Try to understand them. Maybe you can understand them better than I can because honestly, I still cannot differentiate these two clusters half the time. But yeah, just practice it a little. Give it a little of your attention. And I'm sure you guys will destroy your opponents in duels. But anyways, guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.